Chapter 1. Two Cities, Two Worlds. Long ago, in the year 1775, there were two cities that seemed very different, but were connected by their troubles. One city was London, in England, where life moved slowly and people went about their business, quietly. The other city was Paris, in France, where hunger and anger filled the streets. Poor people suffered under the rule of rich nobles who cared little for their pain. In this time of unrest, a strange thing happened. A coach carrying passengers through the countryside stopped suddenly. The driver shouted, "Who goes there?" A man stepped out of the shadows. He was thin and pale, as if he had seen many hardships. "My name is Jerry Cruncher," he said. "I bring a message from Tellson's Bank." The coach belonged to Mr. Jarvis Lorry, a kind and wise man who worked for Tellson's Bank. He leaned out of the window and asked, "What is the message?" Jerry handed him a note. Mr. Lorry read it carefully and then nodded. "Thank you," he said. "Return to the bank and tell them my reply is recalled to life." Jerry looked puzzled, but did as he was told. Inside the coach, Mr. Lorry thought deeply about the message. It was about a man named Dr. Manette, who had been locked away in a dark prison for nearly 18 years. Now he was free. But would he remember how to live like a normal person? The coach continued its journey until it reached a small inn near Dover. There, Mr. Lorry met a young woman named Lucie Manette. She was beautiful, with golden hair and a gentle smile. When she heard about her father, she was shocked. "My father?" she whispered. "Alive! But I thought he was dead." Mr. Lorry explained softly, "He has been found, Miss Manette. He is alive, but he needs your help. Will you come with me to Paris?" Lucie nodded bravely. "Of course," she said. "He is my father." When they arrived in Paris, they went to a poor neighborhood where an old man sat alone in a small room. This was Dr. Manette. At first, he didn't recognize Lucie. His eyes were empty, and his hands shook as he worked on making shoes, a habit he had learned in prison to keep himself busy. Lucie knelt beside him and took his hand. "Father," she said gently, "it's me, Lucie, your daughter." For a moment, Dr. Manette stared at her blankly. Then, slowly, tears filled his eyes. "Lucie?" he murmured. "Is it really you?" She hugged him tightly. "Yes, Father. I'm here now." With Lucie's care and love, Dr. Manette began to heal. Over time, he grew stronger and started to remember what it meant to be free. Together, they returned to London, leaving behind the sadness of Paris, for now. But far away in France, trouble was growing. The poor people were angry at the rich nobles who treated them cruelly. They whispered of rebellion and change. No one knew it yet, but these whispers would soon become shouts, and the lives of everyone in both cities would change forever. What would happen when the anger of the French people boiled over? And how would Lucie and her father fit into the storm that was coming? Chapter 2. Storms in Paris. Back in London, life seemed peaceful compared to the chaos brewing in France. Dr. Manette was slowly recovering under Lucie's loving care. He still had moments of sadness when memories of his long imprisonment returned, but he was learning to live again. Lucie, too, felt hopeful. Her father was no longer a stranger, and their bond grew stronger every day. Meanwhile, in Paris, the anger among the poor people continued to grow. The streets were dirty, and hunger gnawed at everyone's stomachs. Rich nobles rode through the city in fancy carriages, ignoring the suffering around them. One day, a cruel nobleman named Marquis Saint-Evremond drove recklessly through a crowded street. His carriage struck a child, killing him instantly. The crowd gathered around, shouting angrily. A desperate father cried out, "You've killed my son!" But the Marquis only sneered. "It is nothing," he said coldly. "A peasant. Child means nothing to me." That night, as the Marquis slept in his grand house, someone crept into his bedroom and stabbed him. On the wall above his bed, they left a message written in blood. A drawing of a guillotine, the symbol of revenge. News of the murder spread quickly across France. Some cheered, saying it was justice for all the wrongs done by the nobles. Others feared that such violence would lead to more trouble. In England, Mr. Lorry heard about the growing unrest and shook his head sadly. "These are dangerous times," he said to Lucie. "We must be careful." Around this time, two men entered Lucie's life. The first was Charles Darnay, a handsome and kind-hearted man who often visited her family. He was French by birth, but had moved to England because he hated the cruelty of his uncle, the same Marquis Saint-Evremond who had been murdered. Charles wanted nothing to do with his family's bad name, and Lucie admired him for it. The second man was Sydney Carton, a lawyer who worked alongside Mr. Lorry. Sydney was clever but unhappy. He drank too much and often spoke bitterly about his wasted life. Yet there was something gentle in his eyes when he looked at Lucie. She saw the good in him, even though others did not. One day, Charles Darnay found himself in trouble. Someone accused him of being a spy because he traveled between England and France so often. At his trial, Sydney Carton saved him by pointing out how much they looked alike. The judge couldn't tell them apart and decided there wasn't enough proof to convict Charles. After the trial, Charles thanked Sydney warmly. "You saved my life," he said. "I owe you everything." Sydney shrugged. "Don't thank me," he replied. "I didn't do it for you." But deep down, Sydney felt a strange connection to Charles, not because they looked alike, but because they both loved Lucie. Though Sydney knew he could never be as worthy of her as Charles, he vowed silently to protect her happiness, no matter what. As the months passed, Lucie and Charles grew closer. They fell in love and planned to marry. Dr. Manette gave his blessing, happy to see his daughter so joyful. Even Sydney attended the wedding, though he kept his feelings hidden behind a sad smile. But far away in France, the storm was getting worse. Poor people rose up against the rich, setting fire to houses and taking control of the streets. They shouted, "Liberty! Equality, fraternity, freedom, fairness, and brotherhood." The French Revolution had begun. Charles received news from France that made him uneasy. An old servant of his family begged for help, saying he was in danger. Though he knew it was risky, Charles felt he had to go back. I cannot turn my back on someone in need, he told Lucie. Lucie clung to him, afraid. Please be careful, she pleaded. France is not safe anymore. Charles promised to return soon and kissed her goodbye. But once he arrived in Paris, he was arrested. The revolutionaries saw him as an enemy because of his noble blood, even though he had rejected his family's cruelty years ago. What would happen to Charles in prison? And how would Lucie and her father react when they learned of his arrest? Chapter 3. Prison Walls. When Lucie and Dr. Manette learned that Charles Darnay had been arrested in Paris, their hearts sank. The French Revolution was at its worst, and anyone connected to the nobles, or even suspected of helping them, was in great danger. Prisons were overflowing with people who might never see freedom again. "We must go to him," Lucie said firmly, her voice trembling. "He needs us." Dr. Manette nodded. "Yes," he agreed, "but we must be careful. France is not safe for anyone now, not even for us." With heavy hearts, they prepared to travel to Paris. Mr. Lorry joined them, offering his support. "I will do everything I can to help," he promised. "But remember, this is a dangerous time." When they arrived in Paris, the city felt like a nightmare. The streets were filled with angry mobs shouting for justice or revenge. Soldiers patrolled everywhere, and the air smelled of smoke from burning buildings. Dr. Manette led the way to the prison where Charles was being held, hoping his own past as a victim of the old system would give them some protection. At the prison gates, Dr. Manette spoke boldly to the guards. "I am Alexandre Manette," he said, "once a prisoner of the cruel nobles myself. My daughter and I have come to see Charles Darnay, an innocent man." The guards hesitated, but finally allowed them inside. When they saw Charles, he looked pale and thin, but his eyes lit up with hope when he saw Lucie. "You came?" he whispered, reaching for her hand through the bars. "Of course we came," Lucie replied, tears streaming down her face. "We will not leave you here." Dr. Manette worked tirelessly to free Charles. He spoke to the leaders of the revolution, reminding them of his years in prison under the old regime. Many listened because they respected him as a symbol of suffering under the nobles. After days of pleading, they agreed to release Charles, but only temporarily. If new charges were brought against him, he would return to prison. For a brief moment, the family felt relief. They stayed together in a small apartment, trying to stay hidden from the chaos outside. But their peace didn't last long. One night, soldiers came knocking on their door. "Charles Darnay," they said coldly, "you are under arrest again." Lucie collapsed into tears, clutching her father's arm. "Why?" she cried. "He has done nothing wrong." The soldiers didn't answer. They took Charles away once more, leaving Lucie and Dr. Manette feeling helpless and afraid. Sydney Carton, who had followed them to Paris quietly, watched all of this unfold. He knew he couldn't stand by while the woman he loved suffered. Though he still doubted himself, he made a silent promise. "I will save Charles. For her." Sydney began visiting the courts where prisoners were judged. These courts were terrifying places, People were sentenced to death without fair trials, often based on lies or old grudges. Sydney listened carefully, learning how the system worked and how easily lives could be destroyed. One day, he met a young girl named Little Lucie, who reminded him of Lucie Manette. Her father had been taken to prison, and she begged Sydney for help. Though he couldn't save her father, he gave her money and promised to look after her. This small act of kindness gave him strength. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose. As weeks passed, Sydney grew bolder. He befriended a jailer named Barsad, bribing him with coins and alcohol. Through Barsad, Sydney learned about the secret plans of the revolutionaries and discovered a way to enter the prison where Charles was being held. But saving Charles wouldn't be easy. The guillotine waited for anyone accused of crimes against the revolution. Sydney knew he had to act quickly and make a choice that would change his life forever. What plan was forming in Sydney's mind? And how far would he go to protect the ones Lucie loved? Chapter 4. A Plan of Sacrifice. Sydney Carton spent many nights thinking about how to save Charles Darnay. He knew that time was running out. Every day, more prisoners were taken to the guillotine. The revolutionaries showed no mercy, and Charles's name was already on the list for execution. One evening, Sydney sat alone in a dark corner of a crowded tavern. He watched the people around him, men drinking heavily, women crying over lost, loved ones, and soldiers laughing cruelly. It was clear that fear and anger ruled Paris, but Sydney wasn't afraid anymore. He had made up his mind. He would do whatever it took to protect Lucie and her family, even if it meant giving up his own life. The next morning, Sydney visited the prison where Charles was being held. He bribed Barsad, the jailer, to let him see Charles briefly. When they met, Sydney smiled sadly. "Don't lose hope," he said. "I'm going to get you out of here." Charles looked at him, confused. "How can you help me?" he asked. "You'll see soon enough," Sydney replied. "Just trust me." After leaving the prison, Sydney went to a nearby shop and bought a bottle of strong medicine. Then he returned to the apartment where Lucie and Dr. Manette were staying. They welcomed him warmly, though their faces were filled with worry. "Sydney," Lucie said softly, "thank you for coming. Do you have any news about Charles?" Sydney hesitated before answering. "I do," he said, "but I need your help and your promise to follow my instructions carefully." Lucie nodded. "Anything," she said. "What must we do?" Sydney explained his plan. "I look very much like Charles," he said. "If I take his place in the prison, no one will notice the difference. You and your father can escape back to England with Charles while I stay behind." Dr. Manette gasped. "No!" he exclaimed. "You cannot sacrifice yourself like this." "It's the only way," Sydney said firmly. "I've wasted my life, but this is something worth doing. Please, let me do it. For Lucie." Lucie's eyes filled with tears. "Sydney," she whispered, "why are you doing this?" "Because I love you," Sydney replied simply. and because I want you to be happy with Charles." Though they argued at first, Lucie and Dr. Manette finally agreed to Sydney's plan. That night, Sydney gave Charles the medicine, making him fall into a deep sleep. Then, with Barsad's help, Sydney dressed in Charles's clothes and took his place in the cell. Charles, still unconscious, was carried out of the prison by Dr. Manette and Mr. Lorry, who pretended he was a sick prisoner being moved to another location. As dawn broke, Sydney stood quietly in the cell, waiting for the guards to come. He thought about his life, the mistakes he had made, the chances he had wasted. For the first time, he felt at peace. "It's a far, far better thing that I do," he murmured to himself, "than I have ever done." Meanwhile, Lucie, Charles, and Dr. Manette fled Paris, heading towards safety in England. They traveled quickly, trying not to draw attention. Lucie kept looking back, her heart breaking for Sydney. She didn't fully understand why he had chosen to sacrifice himself, but she knew she would never forget his kindness or his love. Back in Paris, the revolutionaries prepared for another day of executions. The streets were lined with crowds cheering for the guillotine. Among the prisoners led to the square was Sydney Carton. His face was calm and his eyes were steady. As he climbed the steps to the platform, he imagined Lucie smiling at him. One last time. When the blade fell, Sydney's life ended, but his sacrifice ensured the happiness of those he cared about most. Far away, Lucie and her family reached England safely. Though they mourned Sydney's loss, they also remembered his bravery and selflessness. What legacy would Sydney leave behind? And how would the world remember his final act of love?